Good evening, and welcome to Beckman Auditorium, to Caltech, and to a very special Behind the Book. Special for a number of reasons, one of which was that so many of you RSVP'd, or so many of you were told you can't RSVP anymore until we changed venues from Ramo to Beckman so that we could accommodate all of the interested people. So we're thrilled that you're here, and we are all in for a very, very interesting evening. I'm Michael Alexander. I am the Caltech Arts and Culture Liaison and have worked on some performing arts programs that we've done here. I've worked on a series called Movies That Matter, and I'll talk about one of those coming up. And Behind the Book. Both Movies That Matter and Behind the Book were created as a way of providing services during the pandemic, and they proved successful enough that we've continued them and bring them inside of the halls now instead of having to have people watch them online. This evening's program is being recorded, so you can tell your friends that in about a week's time, the Caltech YouTube site will be carrying this. They just have to look at Caltech and Behind the Book, and then they'll find this along with the many others that we have. Just a quick reminder, and I have to remember this myself, it's make sure your phone is on silent. And at the back of the hall, you can see the exit signs. If there's, for some reason, a reason that we can't go out the back, you can gather here on stage. Our staff will help guide you out of the building. Have yet to have an issue where we have to deal with that. I particularly want to start by saying, first off, we had an interesting week here at Caltech last week. The Student Affairs Office has now created a Student Affairs and Support Network. And last week we were talking about supporting those students interested in various types of spiritual needs that they may have here on campus. So it was just coincidental that it was happening just a week before tonight's talk. And hopefully some of the students, because I got a chance to talk to colleagues that we were having this talk, and hopefully some of them went back and told even some of the students that they directly work with, and we'll see. I'm just curious, how many people are here on campus for the very first time? Great, there's a few of you. Well, we have a whole slew of series that we do, and I will come into and announce those in a moment, but I do want to start off here by saying that I'm particularly grateful to Professor Emeritus Mark Davis. He was able to arrange and actually make a personal contribution to support this evening's program, and it is honoring his late wife, Mary P. Davis, who was a scientist and an engineer and was a very active member of the First Methodist Church here in Pasadena. So I'd like to ask us all to just give him a hand and thank him for his support. We also get some support for many of our programs from the Caltech Employees Federal Credit Union. You can all sign up to be on our emailing list, and we'll only send you one email a month. We have a monthly newsletter, comes out at the beginning of the month. If you go to Caltech, events.caltech.edu, you'll be able to get very quickly to the part of our website where you can sign up and get our mailers. Among the upcoming events we have is that the Caltech's Chamber Orchestra is going to be performing on Saturday, the 30th. No, yes, 30th, yes. No, it's 31st, 30th is, pardon?
31st is a Saturday.
All right, then they're on Friday the 30th. Thank you. This is the interactive part of the program. Okay, good. And they're going to be in Dabney Auditorium at 8 o'clock, and it's a free performance. We have Professor Kimberly C. from our chemistry department, part of our Watson series on February 25th, and she is, her topic is Chasing Sustainable Chemistries for the Future. And I think you've seen notices about that. These Watsons also tend to max out on the number of people registering, so I would advise you to register early. Katie Bowman is going to be here in March on the 25th, and she is going to talk on how AI and physics work together to discover more about the hidden universe. She is the face of the first photograph of a black hole. You probably saw this young lady with her look on her face that made newspapers all over the place. We were very proud to get her to come to Caltech just after that photo was taken, because I can't remember which university she was at, but now she's here working at Caltech. During Earth Week in April, we have two programs that we're doing. On the 22nd of April, as part of our Movies That Matter series, we have a film called Bioscape, and it's how they're using remote censoring to look at what is happening, and it was particularly focusing on South Africa for the purposes of this study. But they're looking at the impact of invasive plants and invasive animals. You know, we love our eucalyptus trees here, but they don't belong here. And the same as in South Africa with other plants that are being brought there. And this movie is going to be looking at the consequences of that. And we're looking to have a very interesting panel and Q&A following that. And then on the Friday night, we're working with the Colburn School's Baroque Orchestra. And they're going to be doing a concert devoted to climate change. Possibly the most well-recognized voice on this campus is Lucy Jones. Dr. Lucy Jones is the seismologist that radio stations and TV stations all over the country go to every time there's a little bit of earth shaking. But she happens to be a Baroque music specialist. She plays the viola da gamba, and she composed a piece of music that has a drone note that starts very low, representing the average Earth temperature in 1880, and that drone note keeps rising as the Earth's temperature, and it's going to be part of this program. It's a free concert, as is the Movies That Matter, and that's taking place here on the Friday, April 24th. We will ask you to register for those as well. Caltech is also the home of the Coleman Chamber Music Series, and you can look them up and find out about their upcoming performances. We've made a slight change for the Q&A tonight. You're going to see information about a Slido, but instead of the Slido, the speakers would prefer that we just use cards. So some of you picked them up already. Our two student staff people here are going to be walking the aisles after the talk at appropriate times. Just raise your hand and they'll give you a card, they'll give you a pencil, and when you're finished with the card, just wave it up and they'll grab it and bring it back up here onto the stage so that the speakers can address any questions that you have. We also have books for sale. We're working with Vromans, and there's a lot more people than there are books. So if they run out of books, they have a QR code that you can go to so you can secure a book for yourself. Professor Emeritus Mark Davis joined Caltech in the Chemical Engineering Division in 1991. He is one of a very small group of people elected to all of the United States National Academies: Sciences, Engineering, Medicine, and Inventors. He's the first Caltecher to receive the Prince Asturias Award for technical and scientific research given to him by the King of Spain. He, like our author, has of late been studying the interface between science and religion, and I'm going to let him do the introduction of our visitor from near Newcastle, England, our main speaker tonight, Dr. Reverend David Wilkinson. So let's give a welcome to the two gentlemen, Professor Mark Davis, the Dr. Reverend David Wilkinson.
Good evening, everyone. It's really great to see this many people interested in this topic. You know, we had to move it from Ramo, as you heard, because it just wasn't enough room. So it's my pleasure to bring Reverend Dr. David Wilkinson to Caltech this week. We've had a great week interacting with students, faculty, etc. David is the professor in the Department of Theology and Religion and the director of a program called Equipping Christian Leadership in an Age of Science program, both at Durham University in the UK. He's well known throughout the world for his work on the interface between these two, science and religion. And David has a very unusual background. He started off in his first PhD was in astrophysics. And the title of his thesis was Molecular Hydrogen in Galaxies. And he doesn't know this, but David and I have a commonality from our graduate work. David worked on hydrogen for star formation in galaxies. I worked on making hydrogen from water so that we could have hydrogen here on Earth. Yes. So mine is a little bit more mundane than his work. But after finishing his PhD in astrophysics, he went on and got a second PhD in theology. So David is currently a fellow of the Royal Astronomy Society, or Astronomical Society. And interestingly, he's a regular contributor to BBC Radio 4's Thought for the Day, where something that's interesting in the science realm, he gets notified maybe the day before, even sometimes the morning. Can you talk about it for 2 minutes and 45 seconds, that precise? And it's to try to explain to the audience what this means and then how does it relate to theology. And he's actually done some of these on work here at Caltech and JPL. So as we were meeting with the students this week, we were joking, do some really good work and he'll talk about it. So he's published, as I said, very extensively in this interface area. And I've read many of his books. And so I selected two for us to begin the conversation tonight. So what we're going to do is we're going to begin the conversation on these two books, and then we'll open up for questions. We have some of the cards already, and you can bring up the card, or we'll have people collect the cards. But I really would like to have it be a true conversation between you and David. So the two books that I selected, you've seen in the advertisement, and what I'd like to begin with is this one. The title of this book is God, Stephen Hawking, and the Multiverse. And so, David, what is it that what are the messages that you want to convey to your reader in this book?
Well, first of all, thank you for having me, Mark. Lovely to be in conversation with you first. Two messages, really, from this book. The first is that Professor Hawking's work is fascinating from a scientific point of view. And I became interested in it originally as a young research student because there was and continues to be a problem with our ability to explain the whole story of the universe. Physics, as many of you know here, is extremely successful. It can tell us what the universe was like when it was only 1 million years old. Our current age, by the way, is 13.8 billion years. Some of us feel it more than others at times. We know what the universe was like, we think, using our current laws of physics, right back to 1 second old. And if that isn't sufficient, many believe right back to 10 to the minus 43 of a second. That's 1 divided by 10 followed by 42 zeroths of a second. If you're a biologist or an engineer or a normal person, if you know what I mean, you'll say that's basically zero, isn't it? But no, it's not. At that point, our laws of physics break down. And that's because general relativity and quantum theory don't fit together. That's why Professor Hawking, and this is what intrigued me first of all, pursued a quantum theory of gravity to fill in that first 10 to the minus 43 of a second. And that's a continuing story for both theorists and observationalists in trying to take science back to the very beginning. And that links me to my second point, which is that the religious believer shouldn't be afraid of that. That's a fascinating story, first of all, to explore all of the physics in that. But the religious believer shouldn't be afraid of that quest, because sometimes religious believers use inadequate arguments for God. And when I was a young student, I used an inadequate argument for God. It went something like this, and you've probably heard it in a restaurant or a pub. It goes like this. If the universe began with a big bang, then who lit the explosion? Who set it all off? Or to put another way, if our laws of physics break down at 10 to the minus 43 of a second, isn't that where we need to insert God? The trouble with that, for me, is that it's what Charles Coulson, a great mathematician, called a God of the gaps argument. Beware, said Coulson, if science has a gap in it, of inserting God into the gap as the explanation. Because increasingly, as science explains more and more of its own area, God is pushed out of the gap. And so, originally the book was just about God, the Big Bang, and Stephen Hawking. And it said, first of all, this is really interesting science. Isn't it cool? Isn't it provisional? Let's explore it. The second message is, if you're a religious believer, don't be worried if those who follow Professor Hawking in this quest fill in that first 10 to the minus 43 of a second, because that simply tells us more of God's story. Kepler, the great astronomer, once said that science is thinking God's thoughts after him. And I love that sense of discovery, of journeying, of understanding the universe. And I don't think that God puts limits on that. So really interesting science. And if you're a religious believer, don't see it as a threat. Two messages, I think, of the book.
Okay. So do you want to explain what the concept of the multiverse is?
Well, I'd love to if I really fully understood it, as many of us know. Now, multiverse is very sexy at the moment, both in science and cosmology and in science fiction, of course. And there are many different theories of multiverse. One is that our universe is a little bubble universe amongst many. You know, if you take a washing up liquid and pour on water, you get a foam of bubbles. Well, maybe the universe started as a little bubble which then began to expand in a Big Bang expansion. And ours expanded because the laws of physics within that bubble were just right. And so we may be one of many. And then there were those who talked about many universes in terms of whether the universe expanded and there was enough mass in it, so it then started to contract into the opposite of a Big Bang, a big crunch. And in the 80s, we used to think about whether the universe would then bounce and expand and contract. And we're increasingly skeptical of that because of the discoveries at the end of the 1990s around the accelerating universe, that the universe will expand forever. And then there's another multiverse theory. I don't know whether you want me to go into this detail or not. It's late on a Friday night, but there's another multiverse theory, which is a particular interpretation of quantum mechanics from Hugh Everett III, who said that in every quantum event, the universe bifurcates, splits, and bringing about billions of different universes, all slightly different. So in one universe, Mark, you and I are having this conversation just as a pink elephant comes through the room. Now, all of those theories are interesting. Some of them are supported by some of the interpretations of the early universe and inflationary theory and other things. I think they're important because they remind us that we can't use a certain argument for the existence of God. And I'll come back to that again in a moment. Okay. But the philosophical standing of other universes is really important because at the moment, it's difficult to see how you can pass information from one universe to the other. And if we can't pass information from one universe to the other, does that bring it under the realm of science or not? And that's where there's a great deal of controversy and conversation. Now, if I may apply then multiverse, I think it's important for this reason. You've probably heard of anthropic balances, what Paul Davies talks about as the Goldilocks enigma. The fact that the laws and circumstance of the universe in many ways are just right for the possibility of life. And I think that's a really interesting observation. It's a non-trivial fact about the universe that the law and circumstance of the universe is just right to bring about human beings. But Multiverse says, hold on a moment. It may be that we just observe that because we're in the universe where we're observing it. In other universes where the laws of physics are different, maybe there are no observers to see. And the importance of that for me is just to be hesitant, again about fellow religious believers who say, I'm going to try and prove the existence of God through these anthropic balances, because God is the only explanation of these balances. Multiverse comes along and says, just be careful a moment. And so for me, these anthropic balances are significant. They may be pointed towards a deeper story to the universe. But Multiverse just cautions me. Now, a number of people say to me, as a Christian believer, are you worried about many universes? To which my answer is emphatically no. I mean, we live in a universe already which has 100 billion stars in each of 100 billion galaxies. That's a lot of stars. A few more universes is not a great theological problem to a God who's created already 100 billion stars and 100 billion galaxies. And so in that sense, it's fun. Is it philosophy? Is it physics? We'll see. But it's not a problem for the person who believes in God.
Great. But I think that when you think about the multiverse, it just pushes the problem back one other level, right? If you only have one universe, there still has to be a beginning. If you have multi-universes, there has to be a beginning for many of them now, right?
That's right. And we need to be careful about beginning, because both of those things we've talked about, Mark, as you know, link together. But underneath that sense of Professor Hawkins' work on the very first moment of the universe, and underneath the sense of multiverse, and of course, those of you who've read Professor Hawkins through his book, The Grand Design, will know that he combines these two together. Both of them assume something very important, which is the physical laws. The laws of nature that many people in this place use because they are universal, and they're faithful, and they're intelligible to us. Now, science assumes the physical laws. It doesn't explain where they come from. Mm-hmm. And so if Professor Hawkins says that the universe comes through a quantum fluctuation, I think it's reasonable for the philosopher, for the theologian, for the faith believer to say, but with respect, where does quantum theory itself come from? And why are these laws intelligible to us? Albert Einstein once said, the most incomprehensible thing about the universe is that it's comprehensible. Mm-hmm. You've just got to think about that for a moment. Why is it that we're here on a Friday evening talking about the universe back to 10 to the minus 43 of a second? And it's well, I hope it's intelligible a little bit to us.
I would say it's fun.
It's fun. And so where do the laws of physics themselves come from? For me, is a metaphysical question. And for the person who believes that this universe is created, then a God who is the faithful sustainer of the laws of physics has coherence to it as an explanation. Can't prove God, but it coheres with the nature of the universe that we see.
All right, thank you, David. So I know you've spent some time thinking and studying about possibilities for the end of the universe.
Yes.
So you just mentioned it's vast, huge amount of numbers. Why? No one knows. But what's the interest in trying to understand how this might progress to people that are here who are not going to be around when any of this happens?
Well, that's right. And so, I mean, you begin with the end of the sun. The sun will eventually run out of hydrogen fuel, will begin to swell up. The Earth will be crispified in the outer layers of the sun. But the accelerating universe, and there's some interesting science involved in all of this at the moment, of whether it's accelerating with a constant kind of acceleration, or whether there may be something different in the future. But a universe that accelerates and gets bigger, people say, well, we're going to be around for a long time as a universe. The trouble is that as the universe expands, it gets colder, and stars turn into black holes, and the universe becomes a rather depressing, lifeless place. Now, as you rightly say, Mark, we're talking 20 billion years or so before that happens. So we're all right for breakfast in the morning.
Yeah,
that's fine. But the end of the story is very important in understanding the nature of a story. I mean, you don't read a murder mystery and say, I've got 3/4 of the way through. It's been a nice story so far. I'm not going to read any more. The end of the narrative is important. Now, there are a number of scientists, such as Paul Davies, who find the concept of a cold, lifeless universe immensely depressing, to use his word. I think for the person who believes in creation, the question is, what are the purposes of God with this creation? Now, some Christian believers say, well, God's not interested in the physical stuff of the universe. God's only interested in souls and spirits. I don't see that in the God of the Bible. And in fact, what's interesting to me as a theologian is that the Bible itself talks about the futility of this creation, but God's purpose of transforming this creation into a new heaven and a new earth. Not just a kind of grayish heaven up there, but a whole transformation of this creation. And so I think in the face of a future futility that science predicts in terms of the universe itself, the Christian hope is of a God who transforms the physical stuff of the universe into a new heaven and new earth. And a number of people at this point immediately stop me and say, oh, come on, that's all that. Isn't that just pie in the sky when you die and all the rest of it? But the central message of the New Testament is that that transformation is both evidenced by and modeled in the bodily resurrection of Jesus Christ. That's the importance of the bodily resurrection for Christians, because God actually does something with the stuff of the universe. Now, the fact that God works with the stuff of the universe is really important to me as a physicist, because that's an affirmation of physics and chemical engineering and other odd subjects that come along as well. Yeah.
Great. So this will be off a little bit, but one person I admired a lot was this producer, Gene Roddenberry.
Yes.
So some of you may know that he was the person who came up with Star Trek. And the reason is if you look back at the original series, human progression through the universe always put humans in a positive light. And that's what I liked so much about that, you know, it was we solved the problems we had to, so Earth survived. And as we propagated through the universe, we, of course, ran into all kinds of different characters, but the human perspective on this was always in a very positive, move forward kind of light. Have people in the, philosophical community ever discussed? I thought it was really quite nice, because a lot of fiction, movies, and so forth always painted a negative future. And this one I always admired because it painted a very positive future.
You're right, and many science fiction writers talk about a future which actually is very bleak. Roddenberry had this view that science and technology, coupled with the human spirit, would mean growth and development. And indeed, on the bridge of the Starship Enterprise, different backgrounds, races, languages all came together in common humanity. One or two problems with Klingons here and there, but apart from that, things were pretty much all right. Now, the only hesitation about Roddenberry, and a number of us have engaged with science fiction from the theology community, is that Roddenberry at times strayed from that celebration of that which is human in terms of love and sacrifice into what Richard Borkham and Trevor Hart a number of years ago called the myth of human progress. What they meant by that was that if you take that too far, you say that science, technology, and education can lead to utopia, or, to push it further, inevitably lead to utopia. And the difficulty with that is the Christian recognition that human beings are beautiful and creative, and yet at the same time somehow broken. Theologically, theologians talk about sin as that brokenness, selfishness within us. And so human education, science, technology can do wonderful things. And my friend, you've done wonderful things in science and technology, in terms of healing, in terms of safety, a whole number of things. But we can never achieve utopia, says the Christian, without God being at the center of that human community. And Roddenberry was very skeptical about God. He didn't like God in his narrative. And when Rick Berman and others took over the franchise of Star Trek, if you're a Trekkie, by the way, any Trekkies here, you'll know that Star Trek and Next Generation had very, very few references to religion or spirituality. But as you move through in Deep Space Nine and Voyager, you began to see spirituality beginning to appear more and more. And I think there's something important about that actually the God who is the Lord of the universe goes with us into space. Yeah.
Thank you. So I'm going to move forward to the next book now because I want to give time for questions here later tonight. So the second book I picked that we would discuss for a few minutes is titled Science, Religion, and the Search for Extraterrestrial Intelligence. I'm going to cross out intelligence and let's just say life.
Yeah.
Okay? Yeah. So again, David, I'm going to start off with the question, what were you trying to convey in this book? And, you wrote this over 10 years ago.
I did.
And so many things have happened since that time. Would you ever consider updating it? And if so, what were the things that really impressed you since the time you wrote the book?
I certainly, at the rate of scientific progress, I think I need to update the book every 6 months at the moment. So I began to write it on the cusp or the back of the new discoveries of exoplanets, which has transformed a great deal of the discourse. And much of the work, of course, has been done here. And now we know of over 6,000 exoplanets, planets beyond our own solar system, of which about 220 are terrestrial, small rocky planets. And I think that's the thing that's changed with and the whole movement into telescopes and probes developed in and around here, which allow us to find exoplanets and begin to sense atmospheres, look at the atmospheres to look at signatures for life. And that's an evolving field. But some of the big arguments, I think, stay the same, and I'll give you a few of them. Mm-hmm. The first is to be cautious of the argument that goes, well, we've got 6,000 exoplanets, and therefore we know that most stars will have planets, and a proportion of those, a good proportion, might be terrestrial planets. You know what people say next? You've got 100 billion stars and 100 billion galaxies. Well, therefore, there must be other life and intelligent life out there. And part of the book is saying, really exciting, really interesting science, but be cautious of that argument for two reasons. The first is that you could have lots of life, but it may not be intelligent life. To put it bluntly, it's a long way from an amoeba to an accountant. Or well, anyway, that's for you to decide. You could have lots of primitive life, but actually the evolutionary development into self-conscious, intelligent life, and we're still struggling to know what consciousness is a long road. So there could be lots of primitive life. By the way, that doesn't make Star Trek very interesting. To boldly go to seek out more amoebas and even more bacteria is not quite the... So there's that. The second caution about that argument, there must be life out there, comes from Enrico Fermi, one of the great physicists.
I was just going to bring that up. So
yeah, so let's talk about Fermi for a moment. So
okay.
Fermi is having lunch with some friends, and they're joking about cartoons that were around, because there were two news stories around at the time. One was people seeing flying saucers, and the second was the disappearance of trash cans in New York City. And in a famous cartoon in the New Yorker, there's a cartoon of the aliens taking the trash cans away to their flying saucer. Fermi's having some conversation with his friends, and then he goes into one of his silences. And Fermi went into silence because he was working something out in his head. And they sat at lunch, and they were having lunch, and Fermi looked up and said, "Where is everybody?" Now, what he meant by that was not how many people were in the restaurant, but he thought to himself, if I have an intelligent civilization who sends out a probe or a couple of probes to other star systems, they then self-replicate by using the resources that are there, and they start to send out probes. How long would it take to colonize the galaxy? And we can do that, and actually we can check it against the way that human colonization has happened, and it turns out to be something of the order of 300 million years or so. Mm-hmm. For a civilization to colonize 100 billion stars in our galaxy. That sounds a very long time, but compared to the fact that the galaxies have been around for 10 billion years, it's a very short time. So Fermi's point was that if life was easily evolving into intelligent life, we should have seen it already. Where is everybody? Now, Fermi's friend Leo Szilard, a Hungarian physicist, responded to Fermi's, if they existed, they would be here, by saying they are here, and they're called Hungarians. That was Szillard's response to it. So the first part of the book is to say, let's just be careful with these arguments. The second part of the book, I think, is to try and tell a story that many distinguished historians have told, but actually hasn't got out a great deal. And that is that the first people to speculate about other worlds were Christian theologians. Let me just say that again. The first people to speculate about other worlds were Christian theologians. And if you go back to Basil and Origen and a number of other church fathers, you find them using this argument. They said, if God is the sovereign creator who's free to create however God wants to create, who are we to say that he hasn't created other worlds? Mm-hmm. And then a famous theologian called Nicholas of Cusa coupled that with a very important argument a few centuries later. And Cusa said, the thing that makes us special as human beings is not that we are alone in the universe or the center of the universe. The thing that makes us special as human beings is relationship. The gift of relationship given to human beings by God. And therefore, it doesn't matter where you are or whether you're alone, you are special because you're loved by God. So when we sit down as a family back in England, in order to feel special, I don't need to be the only one at the table. Nor do I have to sit at the head of the table to feel special. I feel special because I am loved. And the importance of that is that some Christians get worried about extraterrestrial intelligence because they think, well, human beings aren't special if there's other beings out there. These church fathers and distinguished theologians of the church said, don't worry about that. God's big enough for all of that.
Right.
God can create in whatever ways God creates. And if there are others, whether it be bacteria or intelligent little green women and little green men, then don't worry about it, because the God that we see in Jesus says that we're special.
Great. So if you ever see this story about Fermi, this is now called the Fermi paradox. So you might see that written in the literature. That's how it's described, what David's story was. And it's a famous quote now. So let's pursue a few more things about life. Talk about Darwin.
Yes.
Okay. So I'd like to hear how Darwin and his, some of his findings and what he said fits into this whole picture. Yeah. And then I'm going to drop you back even further about the first elements of how life, okay?
At which point I'll turn the question around to you and we can talk together on that. I mean, I think Darwin is interesting at this point for a whole number of reasons. I think in terms of the development of life, Darwinian evolution, you can interpret it in different ways. Stephen Jay Gould said, once you start the evolutionary process, you always end up at a different place. Simon Conway Morris at Cambridge has argued against that and talked about evolutionary convergences. He says in the evolutionary picture, this randomness nevertheless has certain convergences. So the eye appears a number of times independently in the evolutionary tree. And Simon's work means that we could say that if you had different life developing, evolving, it might be that a humanoid embodiment of intelligence is an evolutionary convergence. And so rather than James T. Kirk saying it's life but not as we know it, Spock, actually there could be some similarity to the nature of life. But Darwin himself was an interesting person and at the heart of a lot of debates around science and religion. Darwin, started off thinking about being a doctor, but didn't really could cope with the sight of blood. And he did what everyone who drops out of medical school does. He went to become a church leader, a clergyman. He didn't get into that either because he started to talk with the botanists and geologists at Cambridge and became fascinated by this. He then, on the basis of observations in the Galapagos Islands and his experience of fossil beds and earthquakes in South America, came to this view of evolution, but his religious faith, and I find this most moving, his religious faith was not eroded by the science. As Nick Spencer has argued, his religious faith came down to the fact that his beloved daughter Annie at the age of 10 became ill. Darwin prayed, took her to Malvern, to the waters there that supposedly had healing power, and she died. It was at her death that Nick Spencer argues that Darwin's religious faith evaporated at that point. And I think for all of us, our personal story and our scientific understanding are always intertwined. They're always there together. The other interesting thing about Darwin is the myth that Darwin was rejected by Christians here, there, and everywhere. In fact, the Christian church had a mixed reaction to Darwin. Asa Gray, the Harvard paleontologist, Charles Kingsley, author of The Water Babies, were great advocates and supporters of Darwin. Many, and sorry for the sexism, but this was the case in the 19th century, over 700 gentlemen of science, as they were called in the UK, post-Darwin, wrote a letter in which they said, we're quite relaxed about Darwin. A number of Christians objected, of course. Sorry, I'm getting off the point, Mark.
No,
Bring
that's
me
okay.
back to where you want me to be.
Well, I think, you've said what I wanted you to say, hear you say, the story about Darwin and the fact that there wasn't really this major separation that a lot of people think happened.
Right.
So let me drop you back a little bit even further, because today, as we know, people are always talking about, the molecules that we're finding on asteroids now. So there's the discussion of, now we see several different types of amino acids, which are the building blocks of proteins, or that are building the blocks of us. To me, things are so complex, I still can't see this happening spontaneously. The molecules, people talk about, could there be life based on silicon rather than carbon? I've worked with silicon chemistry, I've worked with carbon chemistry. I personally don't believe that.
Sure.
But I've seen enough about how difficult it is to make very complex systems self-assemble to, do very precise function. And one of the things that we have in our body is that these molecules have a left hand and a right hand. And all of the proteins and amino acids, except for one amino acid, are left-handed. And all the sugars in your body are right-handed. Why? And so to me, there seems to be some, I don't know whether we'll ever understand it, but, when you think about how life evolved, and then, some of the other things you might mention, what the Cambrian explosion is and how does that play into it, where does this all fit in from, your side as far as being both a scientist and a theologian?
Thank you. And in one sense, I need to defer on some of these questions to, I'm just a mere astrophysicist. I don't understand a huge amount about this in the way that you do. But hearing you speak, for me, a number of things come out of it. The first is that, isn't this an amazing, complex process and world, first of all? But secondly, that in order to have creation, you have to have both law and freedom. And in fact, both of them need to go together. The law and circumstance of the universe, as Paul Davies would say. Now, Paul actually believes that some of these things are because written into the very laws of physics are the possibilities for these things to happen. We're back to, where do the laws come from? And this particular understanding that there is something very special about this universe. Remember, I said I don't believe that there is a proof of God in this. But I do think that they are pointers towards a deeper story to the universe. So you and I can sit here and we can go, isn't this amazing? Now, what we then could do is take different interpretations of it. One of my favorite friends, cosmologists, is Sir Lord Martin Rees, former Astronomer Royal in the UK. And Martin wrote a book a number of years ago called Just Six Numbers. He says, if these numbers aren't just right, you can't have life. And then he said, my friends, you've got three possibilities in response. You could say, well, all of this is just very interesting, but to be honest, I'm not really interested, so I'm going away to watch another episode of The Simpsons or Star Trek. Mm-hmm. And Lord Rees says, no scientist can really say that, because some of these things are so extraordinary, you just can't ignore them. So that leaves them with two possibilities. One is multiverse, which we've talked about. The second is, he says, this is creation. Now, Lord Rees goes for multiverse. I go for creation as the most compelling answer to that. But I want to just be clear about this, that is part of more arguments and more insights into the world that are important for me. I'm not led to Christianity because of these scientific arguments. I was led to Christianity because I encountered Jesus Christ, both in history and in present experience. Now, that gave me a framework by which I can find that these scientific arguments go here together. And it's from that framework that, for me, that's the most compelling interpretation. That means that I come not to prove God to people, but to suggest that from the framework of seeing a God who becomes a human being in Jesus Christ, some of these scientific insights cohere with that interpretation.
Great. So I'm going to start now with taking questions that have been turned in from the audience. And as you have more, Camilla, can you pick those up and we'll get on them. And please, I apologize for if I stumble on these questions because they're handwritten and some of them are going to be hard for me to read, okay? So while they're doing this, I'm going to start with this question here, which is, black dark matter is about 90% of all stuff. Is the spiritual realm there? Could it be that dark matter interacts with the physical world in ways such as demons, angels, etc.?
Wow, thank you, Mark. What a great question to start off, and thank you, whoever. One or two comments on that. The first is quite right to recognize that some 95% of the universe is made up of dark matter and dark energy. Around about 65 to 70% dark energy and 20 or 25%, whatever, I can't do my maths, dark matter. Now, first of all, it's important for me, therefore, to say that we don't know at the moment definitively what the dark matter is, and we certainly don't know what the dark energy is. We call them dark matter and dark energy because we don't know what they are, which means I sit before you talking about science, cosmology, astrophysics, knowing only what 5% of the universe is made of. You might say, he's got a cheek coming all the way from England, talking to us about the universe, and he only knows what 5% of the universe is actually made of. But at least I know that we only know what 5% of the universe is made of. I think for me that's, first of all, a question about the provisionality of science, that actually there are still big questions that we're pursuing. Now, the interaction of dark matter we know because it interacts gravitationally with galaxies and stars. Dark energy is a much more difficult thing to understand. And we know that it interacts, but I've never thought about it in terms of how these things interact in the spiritual realm. I think the first thing I want to say is that for me, if God is the God of creation, he's the Lord of not just the visible matter, but the dark matter and the dark energy. God is God of all. And if you're interested in this, you'll know that within Hebrew scriptures, there was often the location of that which is evil within the deep, the sea. You get that worked through also in Revelation later on. So people have always struggled with that which is unknown. But in all of that, the Hebrew Christian Bibles are full of God being Lord and creator of all things. I'm not sure what I think about angels and demons.
Okay.
I've had experiences in life and in pastoral ministry which go beyond some of the normal ways of explaining things. And I'm open to the possibility of that which goes beyond our normal laws of the universe. But that's a question I'll have to think more about. I'm sorry that that's not a really compelling or sharp answer to the question, but some of these things I've not thought about before. Well, thank you.
Great. Okay, you ready?
Yeah.
Okay. This question is, the director of the Vatican Observatory said that God is the force that arranged the universe. The Bible says that God sent us his only child. How can these two statements be reconciled? What's your take on that?
Yeah, thank you for the question again. And the director of the Vatican Observatory, who I know well, is someone who believes in both of those statements. I think there is a sense in which we're talking about a God who creates the whole universe and a God who seems to do particular things. And that's often been a difficulty. It's called in Christian theology the problem of particularity. The Christian revelation suggests that God communicates through a particular man in a particular place at a particular time in a particular way, Jesus. Why God chose to do that, I have no idea. But I'm convinced by looking at the history that Jesus can only be understood by this was God himself walking the pages of history. And there is something, I think, really important about this particularity. A number of years ago, a very good science communicator and professor of physics, John Taylor, wrote a book called Black Holes. In it, he talked beautifully about black holes, but he also had his argument why he didn't believe in God. And his argument against the existence of God went like this. He said, the universe is pretty big. Any God who created it must be infinite. Our minds are finite. Probably think that tonight, by the way. Our minds are finite. Professor Taylor then went on to say, how can a finite mind ever understand an infinite God? Therefore, we can't understand an infinite God. We may as well say God doesn't exist because we have no ability to talk about God. But, says the Christian, with respect, Professor Taylor, what if the infinite God decided to reveal God's self to the finite mind in a way that the finite mind could understand? That seems to me to be a logical possibility. In fact, for Christians, it's a central good news that this universal creator has chosen to reveal God's self to us in a way that the human mind can understand, by God becoming a human being, or as John would put it at the beginning of his gospel, the Word became flesh, a human being, and lived amongst us, full of grace and truth. So that by seeing the particular, we get a glimpse of the universal.
Great. Thank you, David. So here's the next question, okay?
These are great.
Returning to the Fermi paradox, with regards to your perspective on creation, could it be that humans aren't the only intelligent life in the universe, but maybe not even the first?
Yeah.
Could there be others, and we're like older siblings?
Yes, there could be, and I'm open to that, both as a scientist and a Christian. One of the issues in this we've got to be just a little careful about is there could be other intelligent life there, but we might not be able to see it. So, for instance, if there's an intelligent civilization in one of our neighbor galaxies, Andromeda, and they send a message to us saying, hello, is there anyone there in the Milky Way? That message would take about 2 million years to reach us. If we then send a message back saying, Yes, we're here. Who are you? That would take another 2 million years to go back. That's not a very interesting conversation, to be honest. But if you take that forward, it does mean that there may be civilizations there that are so far away that we might never know. The Fermi paradox only works for this galaxy. It wouldn't worry me at all if there were other intelligent beings elsewhere in the universe. For me, that would be a reflection of an extravagant God who creates. And the Old Testament particularly talks about the extravagance of the Creator God. Psalm 19 begins with, "The heavens declare the glory of God." Does that include other intelligent beings? It may do. The only way we can find out is by looking at the universe, exploring the universe, observing the universe. To find out what the universe is about, we have to do science, observation. God has given us that gift to do. I hope that answers the question in part.
Okay, I've been told that I can do 2 more questions. I mean,
Right,
I've got a whole pile,
I've
I'm
spoken
sorry.
far too long, forgive me.
So, what is your greatest challenge as, you openly speak about your faith in science?
Yes. The greatest challenge, I think, for me, is the problem that the world and we experience evil and suffering. If Christians, including myself, say that God is a good God, who is a loving God, then there is a fundamental problem, paradox, with our experience of suffering and evil, and the scale of that suffering and evil within the world. And I don't think there's an easy answer to that, Mark.
Yeah. Right.
I just don't think there's an easy answer. What holds me as a Christian is what I would do actually sometimes as a scientist. And you and I know that in any scientific model, there's always evidence for and evidence against. What you do as a scientist is you weigh the evidence for and against. The evidence that I see in Jesus of a good, loving God enables me to hold my unanswered questions about evil and suffering in the world. I think that's the greatest unanswered question for me. But it's not just an intellectual question. It's a personal question. When suffering or evil hits you, when you experience that in the lives of your friends. And those of you who are religious believers, if you pray and God doesn't seem to work, just as it was for Darwin with Annie, I think that's the greatest challenge.
Just a little bit of a follow-up for the last question is thoughts on how theology, religion can align with these scientific advancements that are coming, like genetic engineering,
Yes.
like super, intellectual property type, the consciousness argument for
Absolutely.
AI,
Absolutely.
all of these things. So just briefly.
Yeah, thank you. Our project in Durham, we work with Christian leaders. We also work with some of our leading scientists, many of whom are not people of faith themselves, but who want to engage with communities of faith and Christian theologians. And in part that's because some of the ethical questions and some of the questions about what it means to be human that we expose in artificial intelligence, in genetic engineering, are clear. They're there every day. And a number of these scientists will say to us, well, you Christians have 2,000 years of reflection on ethics and what it means to be human. Maybe you might be able to help us. Now, the key in that situation for me is that the Christian doesn't come in and say, okay, this is what you need to believe and this is what you need to do. For me, the good news of Jesus Christ is gift. I come to offer it to people, not to impose it on people. And the insights of Christianity for me are extremely helpful in understanding what it means to be human, in understanding some of the challenges that we have in the correct use of science, either for selfish gain or for justice and healing for all. I think Christianity makes a contribution to that. It doesn't tell people what they have to do. And so the sense of sitting around the table and talking about this together as a community seems to me very important. And I have to say that in my experience, scientists are more open to this than some of our church leaders. Some of our church leaders are wonderful, but many of our church leaders are a bit frightened about getting engaged in these conversations. I don't think they should be, not least because many of the folk in their congregations are working with these questions day by day as scientists, technologists, engineers. And if you're a scientist, technologist, or engineer tonight, or you teach science in high school, or you're studying science as a student, I want to say thank you to you. Thank you for what you do in exploring the universe and working with it. Because that for me is a God-given activity. And you're helping me. You could help me a bit more in answering some of the questions that I've been asked tonight. But keep on going, because I appreciate the work that you're doing. And I want to affirm it and say thank you to you for doing it.
Great. Thank you, David, for all of your insights tonight.
Thank you. Thank you to both of you for a most provocative evening. This is really quite wonderful to have you both here tonight. David is going to be out just outside the doors. They're selling books. He'll be there at a table so he can autograph them. Want to remind you to sign up to be on our mailing list. Again, that's at events.caltech.edu. And this has been a very special evening because we don't have calls and talks of this type very, very often on this campus. And so I'm very happy that all of you came to be part of it. And I'm particularly want to thank Professor Davis for bringing this to our attention and making it possible for us to have this evening. So thank you so much. And let's give them both a great big hand again. Thank you.